not deceiving you, welcome aboard to This Week in Nickelodeon History. I'm your captain, Captain Eric, and that was the Halloween rendition of the I'm Ready, a SpongePod Squarecast theme song that was composed by Hugh Wagner and did such a wonderful job that I wanted to bring some of that Halloween celebration over into this week in Nickelodeon history. If you would like to check out Hugh Wagner and any of the musical talents he can bring to your life, you can check him out in the podcast description below. But let's start out this week in Nickelodeon history all the way back in the 80s. We're going all the way back to 86, as 36 years ago on November 1st, 1986, we had the premiere of the American Movie Review Show, Rated K, for Kids by Kids, a movie rating show created by Debbie BC, and it ran all the way until December 18th, 1988. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be an exact episode count for Rated K, but it did run for about 2 years on the network. 35 years ago, on November 2nd, 1987, we had the premiere of the Nickelodeon game show Finders Keepers, created by Jeffrey Darby, Bonnie Grossberg, Michael Klinghoffer, Neil Krupnick, and Dee LeDuc. The show ran for 195 episodes, 130 of those on Nickelodeon and 65 in syndication. 20 years ago, on October 31st, 2002, we had the final Nick or Treat on Nickelodeon, which was a programming block for the Halloween season on Nick, but beyond it just being a clever advertisement for their programming, Nick or Treat every year was a different chance to win different prizes from Nickelodeon in many different ways, and every year they offered something completely new for Nick or Treat. Nothing really got as big as it did in 1994 and 1995, as Nick or Treat was filmed live at Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida, and really put an emphasis on how big Halloween was for the network. And after that, it would go off to varying degrees of success before finally coming to an end on October 31st, 2002.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
15 years ago, on October 30th, 2007, we had the premiere of Roxy Hunter and the Mystery of the Moody Ghost on Nickelodeon, followed by a year later, 14 years ago, on October 31st, 2008, Roxy Hunter and the Horrific Halloween. 10 years ago, on November 2nd, 2012, we technically had the final episode of Fanboy and Chum Chum air on Nickelodeon. Now, the final episode of the show, Brain Freeze, wasn't ever technically aired on Nickelodeon. Instead, it was released a year earlier on DVD on August 16th, 2011, a half-hour special all about the characters forgetting who they are, and it is in fact the final episode. And a year later, they just aired the episode before Brain Freeze on Nickelodeon. That was the run. And then on July 12th, 2014, Brain Freeze would make its television debut on Nicktoons. The show was created by Eric Robles, who has a pretty cool name, by the way. I don't know if you know this, Eric, but that's an awesome name. The show ran for 2 seasons of 52 episodes. If you haven't ever watched Nick Tendo's video on Fanboy and Chum Chum, it pretty much encapsulates my exact feelings of the show, where at times it is really in your face and overtly annoying, but at that same level, there is a great design to the world that they have at hand. On top of that, just the way that the characters surrounding Fanboy and Chum Chum react to them, and certainly some of the humor that they use throughout the show. It's not going to be for everybody, but it is a Nicktoon through and through. It's a show that it really doesn't take much to be able to feel that Nickelodeon level of energy coming right at you. And I think it's worth a watch. If you have never watched Fanboy and Chum Chum, there really aren't any episodes at the top of my head that I could say you should just go and watch this one because it'll be the perfect encapsulation. If you're going to do anything like that, you watch Nintendo's video. But if you're going to just jump into the series, just jump headfirst into the deep end. Just go right into it. You're not going to regret it. 7 years ago, on October 30th, 2015, we had the finale of Wits Academy. Created by Mariela Romero and Katharina Lebedouar, the show ran for one season of 20 episodes. 3 years ago, on November 1st, 2019, we had the premiere of America's Most Musical Family. Presented by Nick Lachey, the show ran for one season of 13 episodes. The judges of this show are Sierra, Debbie Gibson, and for some reason, David Dobrik. And I've mentioned this on the show before anytime I've brought up this program. But what, in any musical aspect, does David Dobrik bring to the table? I mean, really, can you imagine being a singer and working hard towards what you love to do and getting to this moment on television to have David Dobrik give you any sort of advice in your musical talent or your career? You know, it's not like they're on a show called How to Harm Your Friends with Construction Equipment, because then we're talking about an entirely different show. And on that moment in time, welcome aboard, Judge. But in this situation, I don't think that was a good choice for a judge, other than just getting a name of somebody online who is popular and is going to bring possible eyes to the program. But what's the crossover? It's not like David is making musical content, therefore it makes sense of anything. I don't know. It ran for one season of 13 episodes, and the winner of the entire competition, America's Most Musical Family, is, of course, to the Malazwe brothers, who won the competition over 30 other families. Congratulations to the brothers. And on to our next show, which finished its run on Nickelodeon 3 years ago. On November 3rd, 2019, we had the final episode of Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? The game show was created by Mark Burnett, Barry Posnick, and John Stevens, and has aired for a few seasons on Fox, 2 years on syndication before landing for 20 episodes on Nickelodeon. The original host of the show was Jeff Foxworthy. The comedian was replaced by John Cena for the Nickelodeon run, which I gotta say, weird choice to just have no host on the screen for this. I gotta imagine that's why it didn't last long on Nickelodeon, because there was nobody hosting the show. They just had kids out there just kind of acting like they knew what was going on for the show, but there was no actual host. What is up with that, Nick?
Are you sure about that?
2 years ago, on Halloween, October 31st, 2020, we had the final episode of Group Chat with Jaden and Brent. Group Chat was originally started as Group Chat with Annie and Jaden for its first season, before being changed over for Jaden and Brent in its second season. And throughout the year of 2020, from May 23rd to October 31st, Group Chat was an emergency effort for Nickelodeon to continually have some sort of live action content on the air while they were unable to actually have actors and directors together with all of the COVID restrictions going on. And we were just smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. Well, everybody else was making at-home Zoom-like content, and boy, that is going to be a year or two looked back on in decades to come for everything that came out during that time, of all of these Zoom call-like TV shows, including the ones that Nickelodeon did with Danger Force, but they made an entire show about the Zoom call concept, which I gotta say was smart and certainly needed of the time for some sort of entertainment to be found on television instead of just reruns, because there really wasn't anything happening live. But I am also glad that we are out of that time frame. I'm sure all of the actors associated with Group Chat are as well. And as far as this week in Nickelodeon history is concerned, apparently we have a new premiere this week. On November 3rd, 2022, The Really Loud House premieres on Nickelodeon, to the collective eye roll of everybody. But I'm going to take an optimistic approach about this show. In the same vein of making the Fred show after they did the movies, you know, you're coming together to make this live action version of this cartoon. You're making this holiday movie. You get all of these actors together who perfectly at least look like the characters. I didn't see the movie, so I don't really know how well they did portraying the characters, but from the outside looking in, it looked good. It looked all right. I've seen worse. And if you have all of these actors together and you already have the sets, I can understand the thought process of, do we do a sequel? Do we make another one of these movies with these actors? Or do we just make a TV show? Are there more stories we can tell with these live action actors playing these cartoon characters? I know it's not what everybody wants. I mean, even the live action movie was a collective eye roll from everybody. But compared to a lot of cartoons that go live action, at least for the look, the Loud House has done a good job. They did a good job with the movie and even with the look of the show. It just looks like the Loud House. And there have been more than enough adaptations of cartoons where they don't even try to emulate the look of the characters of the cartoon they're copying, whether or not it's their choice of clothing or hairstyle or whatnot. They might change something up. For the most part, everybody here looks the part that they're meant to be playing. And I gotta say, if you have all of those actors there, you do that movie and it's a success, it makes sense to go right into doing more with these characters. So if you're a fan of The Loud House for one, and you enjoyed the Loud House Christmas movie, the live action one, then I hope you enjoy the Really Loud House. Other than that, I think that's going to be it for this week in Nickelodeon history. Now, for my top 5 of the week, I might have a little bit of a cheat here because I may have done a list like this before on a previous episode concerning Halloween, but I went through my list of this week in Nickelodeon history for this run of it, this podcast, and it's not just a segment, and I can't find that I ever talked about my top 5 Nickelodeon Halloween specials. So I know in my past I have talked about them before, but let me tell you, I think I have readjusted this list since the last time I have talked about it, and I am ready to unleash my top 5 Nickelodeon Halloween specials with my number 5 Candy Bar Creep Show from season 1 of Rugrats, a nostalgic episode not just for its time frame of Rugrats, but for what happens in that episode, because I love when homes set up their own haunted houses in their garage, or they put in extra effort to do so. Even when it's super corny, I absolutely love that level of Halloween effort. So anytime I see this episode, it reminds me of the Halloween haunted houses that I used to go into as a kid that I don't see anyone building as much anymore locally, like in their home or in their garage. But certainly this episode brings me back to that time. Number 4, Scaredy Pants from SpongeBob SquarePants. Of course, the 13th episode of season 1, a classic in terms of SpongeBob. And I honestly don't think I need to say more, but really what I love about this episode is the whole subversion of Patrick cutting off the bits of sponge and leading into the reveal of what SpongeBob looks like under his ghost costume. That entire episode leading up to that moment is a moment in time. If you were there live watching it, you'll never forget it. Episode 3 on this list is Nightmare in Retroville. The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, episode 10 of the 2nd season. I love the title card for one. I love any reference to Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm a big horror movie buff, but this episode goes ham in the references to the classic movie monsters. We get Frankenstein's monster, we get werewolves, we get vampires, and we even get an alien squid. This episode encapsulates a lot of what I like about Halloween and dumps an entire level of monsters on top of it. That's why I love it. But it's not my number 2, because my number 2 is going to be Rocko's Modern Life Sugar Frosted Frights. As a child, this used to be my bar none favorite Halloween episode of any cartoon. It just was. To me, it perfectly had that Halloween level of charm of the trick-or-treating aspect, seeing the characters dress up in costumes, but it was also a legitimate creepy episode on top of that. It wasn't just telling you a trick-or-treat story, it was actually trying to tell you a nice little creepy tale within the world of Rocko's Modern Life. If you have never watched it before, I can only implore you to add it into your Halloween timeline this year of whatever you have playing on in the background. But my number one episode is one that at the time I wouldn't say was my number one. I would say it was in my top 3. But over time, over rewatching, it has just cemented itself as my absolute favorite Halloween episode. And I hope to tell Jim Jenkins one day this myself. But I'm talking about Doug's Halloween Adventure from the 4th season of Doug on Nickelodeon. This episode not only includes trick-or-treating and shows off that aspect, the characters dressing up, but my favorite aspect of Halloween is not only haunted houses, but high production value haunted houses. I love when amusement parks, Universal Studios in Orlando, when they do their horror nights, I'm talking about those levels of effort. I love going into places like that. And this episode includes the characters heading over to the local amusement park, Funky Town, and getting locked inside of the haunted attraction, Bloodstone Manor, where Baron von Heckelhofer has trapped them for the night. And it is legitimately, to this day, one of my, if not my favorite Halloween special, even outside of Nickelodeon. If I include other ones, I'm sure I'm going to put Doug at the top of that list. I just love what happens in that episode. I love the creep out factor that it gave me as a kid, especially that sequence with the fake floor, if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that had an effect on you. But that is going to be it for this week in Nickelodeon history. Happy Halloween for those of you who celebrate. Happy fall for those of you who get to enjoy the fall foliage as it changes colors into the beautiful oranges and reds and yellows out there. It's a wonderful time of the year, which also included my birthday. So for those of you who wished me a happy birthday on social media, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And with that, that's our time together aboard. You can reach Captain Eric at nickelodeonhistory@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at I'm Ready Podcast and on Instagram at SpongeBob Podcast. Please check out my other podcast, I'm Ready, a SpongePod Squarecast, dropping every Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe to the Captain Eric YouTube channel, where you can also hit that bell so you can be notified anytime the Captain puts something out. You can also follow me at my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TheCaptainEric, and you can also purchase new and updated merch at the Redbubble link, either in the podcast description or in the link from any of my socials. Anything that comes in through my projects go directly back into my projects, and it is always appreciated. One last thing, if you do happen to listen to this podcast through Apple or through iTunes, if you could leave a review and a comment. For some reason, even when you search Nickelodeon history on Apple Podcasts, it doesn't show up. I literally have to search out this week in Nickelodeon history before I'm even brought up in the conversation. It really bums me out when I can type out Nickelodeon history and I'm not even on the first or second or third page. It's crazy. So if you happen to be a listener on this through Apple, if you can help me out in that regard, that would be even more appreciated. But as always, mateys, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and come aboard again next week for another This Week in Nickelodeon History.
On the Lord Hut, here a hut, Nick. On the Lord Hut, here a hut, Nick, Nick. On the Ricky Ticky Low, while living #1 Nickelodeon.